She dedicated more than 30 years of her life to that company. 30 years where each morning began before sunrise. While the city was still waking, she was already on her way, crossing the same streets, passing the same traffic lights, carrying with her a briefcase worn by time and the stories it held. To many, she was just another employee, but to her, that place was almost an extension of her own home. It was decades of laughter, of holiday parties, of financial hardships overcome. Together, of achievements celebrated as a team. She saw faces come and go. She saw young interns become leaders. She saw walls change color, logos modernize, computers replace typewriters. She watched time pass and held firm. But as in so many silent stories, the changes didn't just come with new technologies or new furniture. They also came with a new way of seeing. A look that once held gratitude and now held judgment. Little by little, jokes then increasingly cruel. First, she's too slow. That's old school stuff. I bet you don't even know how to use the new system. Words that weren't spoken in front of her, but echoed through the corridors, reaching her ears like small, invisible cuts. It wasn't just about chores. It was about who she was. For some, their age became synonymous with weakness, with limitation. What was once experience was now seen as backwardness. But she continued. She arrived early, performing each of her duties with the same dedication as always. She hid her trembling hands when she needed to type quickly. She saved her tears for the ride home. Sometimes he would glance at the table where he used to sit with old colleagues, now occupied by young people who barely knew his name. And yet she stayed. He stayed because he believed his worth was greater than any comment. He stayed because deep down there was still a spark of hope that things would change. She didn't know, but that change was closer than she imagined. Life has a curious way of putting the right people in the most unlikely moments. It could be a meeting in the hallway, an unexpected conversation, or the arrival of someone with a different outlook. And for Donna Helena, this arrival was about to happen. Within days, fate would put someone in her path, someone who would not only see her story, but make it shine again. And that would change everything. Donna Helena, 64, was known for her punctuality and dedication. Every day, before the sun even shone through the office windows, she was already there, with her uniform impeccable, her hair tied back, and a ready smile. She was always the first to arrive. She made coffee for everyone, organized tables, reviewed reports, and when anyone needed help, she was there. For many, Donna Helena was more than an employee. She was part of the history of that place. But time has a strange habit of changing not only things, but also people. The office, once familiar, began to welcome new faces full of energy and haste. People who typed quickly, spoke loudly, and seemed to always have a screen in front of their eyes. At first, she believed it would be a good exchange. She would share her experience, and they would bring new ideas. But little by little, she realized that wasn't quite the case. Glances lingered a second longer as she passed. Conversations changed subject suddenly. And then came the comments. At first, discreet almost as if they wanted her not to hear. She's too slow. That's old school stuff. Does she understand the new system? But the words, even spoken softly, found their way to her ears and cut deep. What was once pride in a job well done began to turn into shame. Before, she sat upright, her chest open. Now, she leaned over the table, almost wanting to disappear. Her routine, once light, became heavy. She avoided the cafeteria during peak hours. She preferred to eat alone in a corner, to avoid hearing any more. The hands that had once served coffee with joy now trembled as she held it. Still, she insisted on continuing. She arrived early, completed her tasks, and always responded politely to her colleagues. But inside, she carried the burden of no longer being seen as an essential part of that team. The most painful part wasn't the work, but the feeling of becoming invisible. It was as if, little by little, she was being pushed to the edges of the world she'd helped build. Worse than some days were. There were times when she thought about giving up, quitting her job, and leaving everything behind. But something inside her insisted on staying, maybe because of the memory of when she felt valued, maybe because of the hope that everything could change. What she didn't know is that this change was closer than she imagined. Sometimes all it takes is the arrival of a single person to turn a story upside down. And in a few days, someone new would walk through that door. Someone who would not only see what everyone else ignored, but who would have the courage to show the truth. And when that happened, nothing would be the same again. The teasing became routine. At first, they were small, a snide comment, a veiled joke. But over time, they gained confidence. They started moving her files around on purpose, just to see her desperately searching. They laughed openly when she made a simple mistake on the computer. And when they weren't laughing, they exchanged knowing looks as if to say, "See? I knew it." Little by little, Donna Helena stopped seeking company. She avoided conversations, group lunches, and even informal gatherings. The smile she had carried for decades was disappearing day after day. It was as if her light had dimmed. The days all seemed the same. Arrive early, work in silence, avoid attracting attention. She was no longer the woman who took pride in what she did. Now she was just surviving in that environment. Saddest thing of all, perhaps, that no one seemed to notice. But everything changed one Monday morning. The mood in the office was different. There were whispers, speculation. A new manager had been hired to lead the department. Some were excited, others apprehensive. Donna Helena, as always, stuck to her routine. She arrived early, organized her table, prepared coffee, and began her work. And then the door opened again. His name was Marcos. In his early 40s, with an attentive gaze and a confident posture, he greeted everyone unhurriedly, looking each one in the eye. And it was in that moment, in that brief instant, that something happened. When he reached Donna Helena's table, he extended his hand and said, "Nice to meet you, Marcos." She smiled shyly and replied, "Helena." But unlike the others, he didn't look away quickly. He stared at her for a second longer, as if he had noticed something no one else had. His name was Marcos. In his early 40s, with an attentive gaze and confident posture, he greeted everyone unhurriedly, looking each one in the eye. And it was in that moment, in that brief instant, that something happened. When he reached Donna Helena's table, he extended his hand and said, "Nice to meet you, Marcos." She smiled shyly and replied, "Helena." But unlike the others, he didn't look away quickly. He stared at her for a second longer, as if he'd noticed something no one else had. It was subtle, but it was there in her eyes. A mixture of sadness and something else, something he couldn't name at the time, but which piqued his curiosity. Marcos continued walking, greeting the others, but that image stayed with him. Why did that woman sitting alone in the corner have such a heavy look in her eyes? And most importantly, why didn't anyone seem to see her? In the following days, as Marcos adjusted to his new role, he began to observe. He noticed that she was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. That someone asked for help, she would get up immediately. He also noticed that when he got something wrong, he was the target of muffled laughter. And she noticed the awkward silence that hung around her, as if she were surrounded by an invisible wall. Marcos wasn't the type to ignore what he saw, and within him a decision began to be born. He didn't know how yet, but he would do something that could break that barrier and show everyone who Dona Helena really was. And when the right moment arrived, no one would have the courage to laugh anymore. It was the end of the workday when Marcos, alone in his new office, began to organize some old folders. I wasn't looking for anything specific, I just wanted to better understand the history of the team I was now leading. But when he opened a forgotten drawer, he found a dusty file cabinet full of reports yellowed with age. As he leafed through the first few pages, something caught his attention. A name repeated in practically every document. Helena Duarte. Impeccable reports, precise graphs, data organized with almost artisanal care. Nothing out of place, no mistakes, and more than that, they were records that showed fundamental strategic decisions for the company's growth. He had no doubt much of what that organization had become was anchored in the work of that woman sitting silently in the corner of the office. That night, Marcos went home with one fixed thought. How can someone with that background be treated like that? And in that moment, he decided he needed to do something. Not to please, but to let everyone see what he now knew. And, perhaps, to give her back what time and indifference had taken away. Respect. The next day, he called everyone to a meeting in the main room. The team entered, some carrying notes, others using their cell phones, expecting to hear the usual goals, numbers, demands. But that's not what happened. Marcos took a deep breath, looked at the group, and pointed at without Donna. Her, none of you would have this job today. The silence that followed was almost palpable. Everyone turned to look, some with expressions of astonishment, others with an embarrassment they could not hide. Marcos then began to tell. He talked about the reports, the impeccable organization, the decisions that shaped the company. She revealed that she had trained dozens of employees, many of whom now held senior positions, and that her work was still used as an example today. Words broke the invisible wall that surrounded her. Dona Helena, embarrassed, lowered her gaze. I wasn't used to being the center of attention, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't embarrassed, I felt proud. And in that instant, she realized something. She hadn't become invisible. She was just surrounded by eyes that couldn't see, until now. Applause filled the room. It wasn't just sounds, it was silent apologies. And while this was happening, Marcos knew that that moment would be etched in everyone's memory. Because respect is not something that is earned only with time, but with the courage to show the truth even when no one wants to hear it. But what Marcos didn't know is that that act of recognition wouldn't just change Dona Helena's life. Soon, he himself would discover that by valuing a story, sometimes it is his own that is transformed. From that day on, respect returned. Not because Donna Helena had changed anything in herself, not because I had proven anything to anyone, but because, finally, someone had the courage to show who she always was. Her posture remained the same, as did her routine. She still arrived early, set the table, and made coffee. The difference was in the looks. Now, when he walked through the halls, he no longer encountered muffled laughter or whispers. He encountered genuine smiles, greetings, and invitations to sit together at lunch. It was as if suddenly everyone had remembered that, before any position, there was a being there. And for her, it wasn't about vanity. It wasn't about praise or applause. It was about dignity. About knowing that your story mattered. About feeling that all the effort, all the years, all the days of work, every single one of them, had left marks that no one could erase. The most beautiful thing is that Donna Helena didn't hold any resentment. On the contrary, she started helping even more. Not because I wanted to prove anything, but because it had always been that way. Difference was that now, the hands that received her help also reached out to support her. Maybe that's what the world is missing. Less judgment and more recognition, because experience doesn't get old. She improves herself. Each wrinkle could be a whole book. Every silence can carry a lesson. And every person who has spent years building something deserves at the very least to be seen. It doesn't matter if it's at work, in the family, or in the neighborhood. Recognition costs nothing, and yet it has the power to transform everything. Marcos not only restored respect for Donna Helena, he also changed the culture of that place. He showed that leading is not about ordering. It's about seeing. And if you stop and think about it, maybe this is a choice we can all make at any time. See more. Judge less.